Yeah.
But the reality is my job is to make sure that designers can do the best work they can possibly do. I remove obstacles that are getting in their way. I give them the tools that they need. I coach them. I mentor them. I help them realize their best selves. That's really the role of a design executive.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today. I am your host, David Block, and I'm happy to welcome Jeff Mahacek to the show, an executive design advisor with over 25 years in the design industry. And Jeff and I go way back to our days at Experian between 2005, 2010.
Sounds about right.
You were there until about 2013, I think.
Forever and a day.
And I was a junior. No, I was a senior graphic designer, and you were I
was a baby
designer.
It was a long time ago. We were both very new in our careers.
Right. Exactly.
Long time ago.
Well, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you. It's good to see you again.
So the show is basically a behind the scenes tour of your career journey. And so what I like to do is take a step backwards, far back as I can, to understand where your influences came from. And let's start with schooling. And I think we can even go back further if you'd like, but you got your Bachelor of Science in Theater Arts from Bradley University, right?
Yeah. I was a theater major in acting, performance major in college. And my longstanding joke is that means I can pretend like I can do anything, which is kind of how I think I got my career in the first place.
Oh, okay, great. Could you talk about that decision to go to performing arts, and when did you decide that design, the visual arts path, was the way to go for your career?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So theater, it never really felt like a decision. It was when I was 4.5, I was in community theater plays, and it was just part of my DNA growing up. The decision to go into design, again, never really felt like a decision. So I graduated college in a year, and the first few jobs that I got were not design jobs. They were the jobs that I could get. And the jobs that I could get were executive assistant to a CFO, file clerk for a city office. I worked for one of the employment agencies helping find temp work for people. So I had all these very weird, random jobs, didn't have really a through line to them. But the thing that was the through line through everything was that I would find myself presented these tasks, and I would sit there and go, there's got to be an easier, better way, mostly because I was lazy. And I was like, how can I make my job easier? And so I learned how to create tools, and I would fix things that were broken in order to make my life easier. And I was at Petco, working in their corporate offices in their store communications department. And I was doing the same thing for myself again, when these directors and VPs would say, hey, you're really good at making your life easier. Could you make this other person's life easier? And I'd start getting these assignments to kind of streamline other people's jobs. And I didn't even think of it as design, but it was through creating new forms or new Excel spreadsheets. And before I knew it, I was designing internal tools. And I managed the entire portal, which was the employee website for Petco, for the remainder of my time there. So design really was never a choice. It was just something I was doing. And then we get to Experian. So I started Experian. I don't know if you remember this. This was a very long time ago. I started in like more of a project management role, because again, it was like, get the job you can get. And then I moved into a product management role, and I will never forget probably the greatest executive I've ever known in my life. His name is Dan Moorfield. He was the COO of Experian at the time, or our division of Experian, I should say.
Yeah.
And he pulled me into his office one day and said, hey, Jeff, I'm changing your job. And of course I was terrified. I was like, am I getting demoted? What's happening? Because that's what happens when you're young and you get pulled into the principal's office. And he's like, I just read this article in the Harvard Business Review about user experience.
Yeah.
I think this is who you are. I think this is what you're supposed to do. So now I'm going to make it your job. So you're not a product manager anymore. Now you're our user experience manager. And I laughed and I was like, I don't know what that means. And he's like, that's okay. It takes 6 months to learn. And so I learned as much as I could. I went to Nielsen Norman's Usability Week in San Francisco. I read Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug and The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. These are like some of the foundational things that I read when I was just starting my career. And I ended up writing a white paper of all things. I didn't design anything. I wrote a white paper that proved, because I worked with the finance department, that if just by making the experience a little bit better for our users, if the average person stayed 1 day more before canceling their product, we would make like $87 million more that year. It was like some crazy number like that.
Right.
And that's how it started. So the visual aspect was the very last thing that came into my life. It was really more about problem solving at the beginning.
So were you involved with all the testing, the A/B testing, and all the stuff that we set up during those times, or? Because I know we did a lot of that stuff, and I
to a degree. So you have to remember the era. So and the way that people talked about users in like the aughts is very different than the way that companies talk about users today. And so I was really more deployed to the features of the website that were about fulfilling the need of the users as opposed to setting expectations. So the whole like order process, they're like, don't touch that, don't break that. That's our moneymaker. We don't need that to be better for users. But the credit report. And so I redesigned the credit report. I actually am on a patent for, which is crazy when you think about the way I run my own finances. I'm named on the patent for the score planner feature, which was this tool that let people predict how their score would change in the future based off of like things that they would do to their report today. That was like it never existed. Now there's like 30 websites that have it. I'm not making a dime off of that patent. But yeah, so those were more of the types of products that I worked on back then.
Right. Now, so in between, correct me if I'm wrong. Did you go from when you graduated college? There, you said there were a bunch of things that happened in between. How
random of jobs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I know I did the same thing. I jumped around and until I finally landed in the design industry. And actually, Experian was one of my first jobs as well. Yeah. After graduating. So now I'd like to know, first of all, the transition from to design advisor or consultant. When did that happen in your life?
Like a month ago. So it's still
right?
very new. It's still very well, yes and no. So the first time I have been in-house 95% of my career. Like I've been at a bunch of big companies in IC roles or working as a design leader. If your students don't know the phrase IC, by the way, I'm realizing it stands for individual contributor. Typically within corporate America, you're an IC, an individual contributor, or a member of leadership, and that could be a variety of different titles. Sorry, what was the question again?
When you decided to become a design advisor, you said it was very recent.
I remember now. So I've had 2 breaks in my career regarding that. The first was around 2016. I had just left Intel, where I'd been for a couple of years. And I decided to take the first like professional break I'd ever taken in my life. And it was about a year before I went down the rabbit hole of a full-time role again. But during that time, I did a lot of like freelance. So it was less about like advisory consultancy work. It was more about like project management, leading design projects, being the primary designer on things for various agencies and companies, right. Which was one of the best experiences of my career because I always say like imposter syndrome, which is, I know, a big topic of conversation for a lot of people. That was the year I kind of released my imposter syndrome, because when you put yourself out there, not as part of a company, but as an individual selling your services and your ability to do something, you really learn the difference between yourself and a true imposter, who is going to be somebody who is trying really hard to look like they know what they're doing, but isn't interested in actually getting better, as opposed to somebody who's just constantly trying to get better. So it was a great experience. And that was for about a year. And I worked for the National Gallery of Art during that time period. It was one of the bigger projects. I worked for a couple of startups. And now I'm on the second big professional break. So I just, in the fall, left my last full-time role. And I decided to take some time for me, love myself a little bit. And thinking about the next phase of my career, I really just want to help as many people as I can. And I thought about how can I scale my impact on the design industry? And that really came down the route of like, how can I work with a bunch of different companies in like a mentorship, advisory, design consultancy standpoint, fractional design leadership. And I do my like weekly videos to the design community on LinkedIn to kind of teach them more about design and things that I've learned through my career. So that's that was a long-winded answer. You told me I could ramble during this interview, but that's kind of how I got to where I am today.
Excellent. That's a beautiful path. Now, I do want to take a step back. I know I'm over the path. You know, and that is actually a kind of a thread that runs through a lot of these videos. We're all in a sort of a zigzagging kind of career path, and it's interesting to see where the zigzags go. And so,
if I could, all the students, and I'll say this to you, and I wish I could say it to me and all of my friends when we were like just starting our jobs. You can't predict.
Yeah.
You can't plan. And you can't predict. All you can do is enjoy the ride.
Right.
And make the best decisions you can in the moment.
Right.
Do the best you can with what you got. But if I tried to plan my career, I would never have reached as high as I did. And it probably would have been in an incredibly different arena that wouldn't have been as fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Very true. Now, I do want to jump back to another zig in the zag somewhere over there. And I know that you were a VP of design at NerdWallet, and I would actually like to hear about that experience and possibly if you could talk about one or two of the projects that you were involved with that that posed a challenge for you.
So I loved my time at NerdWallet. There's a special place in my heart for that team and that company. All my nerds, I miss you guys and guys and theys. So I was at NerdWallet for about 2.5 years. I was actually brought on because my good friend Carol, who was running user research, the role for her boss opened up. And she raised her hand and she's like, I think I know a guy. Like he's led similar teams. He's got the finance experience because he was at Experian for 8 years. And so it was through that friend who said, will you be my new boss? That I got the role. It's funny when you're at an executive level in design, the questions you get a lot of the time are like, was there a project? Or what was a design thing that happened? And let me tell you, executives in design don't work on design anymore. It's not really the job. Which was sometimes a hard, bitter pill to swallow on my journey to leadership.
Yeah.
But the reality is my job is to make sure that designers can do the best work they can possibly do. I remove obstacles that are getting in their way. I give them the tools that they need. I coach them. I mentor them. I help them realize their best selves. That's really the role of a design executive. So in terms of projects, it was really just getting that team to fire on all cylinders, and boy, did they. But in terms of actual work, because I don't want to leave you hanging, the projects that stick out most in my head were navigation, where when you're talking about design of a website that gets millions and millions and millions of visitors. I remember before I had joined NerdWallet, I said, if I fix anything, it's going to be that, because there were about 4 different systems of navigation. There were like the top row, the global nav is what we call it. There was like 3 different versions depending on where you were in the site. And if you logged in, that went away completely and you had one going down the left side of the page. It was just weird. Yeah. So we had a massive project that all I really did was get the team on it, encourage them and support them. They did all of the hard work. But we got everything under one system of nav. And that was a project that sticks out in my mind.
If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to hit that like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you. Now, jumping forward, zigzagging again.
Zigzag, go for it.
Forward. So my question is, as a consultant, what has so far, what's been the most rewarding aspect of doing that sort of work and working with other people and consulting for design?
So I've been doing these videos, which is actually not like the paid part of the job, but I told you I'm going to ramble, so forgive me for this.
Go for it.
So let's go back to the dark days. Let's go back to 2020.
Okay.
Everyone went from being in the office all the time to being remote. And it was a learning, it was just hard.
Yeah.
Let's just acknowledge that. But it was also a learning curve for leaders. How do you lead? You're a teacher. You're a leader just in a different scope. What do? How do you behave differently? You can't just do the same thing you always did. And one of, I think, my strengths as a leader was always like, if you saw me in the hallways, I smiled. I would sit in the cafe and anyone could come and sit and hang with me. I was very approachable, and that allowed people to build rapport with me so that when we got into a more professional setting and I needed to review their designs or talk about their career, there was a trust and there was a bond that had already formed. And that just doesn't exist in a virtual world. Right. It just doesn't. There's no cafe to hang out at. There's no walking down the hallway and smiling at somebody. And so I started this practice where every Monday morning I recorded a video saying hi to my team. And sometimes, and let me tell you, the hair is short right now, which is good because it was very authentic. It wasn't a super polished thing. Sometimes I was like halfway through my coffee, so I wasn't quite awake yet. But I would just be like, hey, everybody, it's great to see you. If I had something interesting going on in my life, like I saw a movie over the weekend, I'd tell them about I saw a movie. If I had a design thought, maybe I was in a review last week and we talked about something that I wanted to share with everybody. And it wasn't a lot. It was like 5 minutes. At the longest, they were maybe like 10 minutes. And I just started recording those week after week after week. Yeah. And to fast forward, people told me they helped. People said, you know what, you were less scary as my VP because of those videos. Wow. Because there were people who maybe outside of that would go to 2 or 3 meetings a quarter with me because they had their own managers and they were working on their things and they didn't need me to be in their hair on everything. So I continued that trend at my next job at Redfin. And when I started this endeavor, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do that again, but to everybody. And so every Monday morning, I record a video talking about design. and I posted on LinkedIn, and they're authentic. They're not scripted. I kind of know what I want to talk about, but I'm not reading. And the response that I've gotten has been incredibly positive. Whether it's in the comments, a lot of times it's in DMs of people just saying that helped. Like, I learned something from watching you, or I had my team actually watch that video. Or even in the comments this week, some guy who runs design for a startup, and I think in Argentina or Brazil, was like, we were chatting, and he was asking for my advice on something, and I just find that really rewarding. So in this whole endeavor, which is, like I said, still rather new, but that's the thing I'm getting the most out of.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And I
Long
actually
story to get to the end, but there you go.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love hearing about how those videos came about, and I follow the videos. I watch your videos. I see them all the time on
That's what got
LinkedIn.
us reconnected. We've been on LinkedIn forever, but you're like, I need to talk to him again.
Right, exactly. Now about your videos, I've actually taken a couple of notes on some of your videos. If you don't mind, I'd like to bring up some.
Go for it. Bring it.
Yeah, the most recent one. I think it's the most recent one. You talked about. Let's see. You talked about, where did that go? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. User personas, right? You highlighted their role in making informed, empathy-driven design decisions. So, could you share a specific example where using your personas changed the outcome of a design project?
Oh, 100%. So, here's the TLDR of that video, by the way. User personas are a tool to combat bias. Basically, you already have all the research. You know everything you need to know about a user, but for some reason, bias creeps in. And you're like, oh, but what if we did this? What if we did this? And you lose the research. So you create a persona in those circumstances because it's a lot harder to ignore Becky than it is to ignore a white paper readout or an analyst report. So I was at Intel about 10 years ago, give or take. And if anyone from the team is watching, they might remember this story. So we created a set of personas based off of the market segments that we were going after at the time. And one of the personas was Joey. So I was the one behind all the personas. And on paper, when you looked at like where this market segment lived, what they did for a living, how old they were, what their interests were, like everything we had about it, it reminded me a lot of my ex-boyfriend. Oh. I know. So my ex's name wasn't Joey, but I ended up using a picture of my ex-boyfriend in the persona, because back then, like, Google image was not as strong as it was. Instagram didn't exist. Like most personas back then were like pictures of people I knew.
Right.
And so we used Joey a lot in the work, and we did a lot of scenario-based design. I'm about to go off like on a little side thing for a minute. Scenario-based design isn't something that's used a lot these days. I loved it. We found it very valuable because we were working on very conceptual products that had combinations of hardware, environment, and software to it. It wasn't just an app or a screen. It was wireless charging, where and this was before people had wireless charging. I was the design lead for that program, where it's like, oh, I'm going to put my thing down on this thing and it's going to start charging. And how do I know it's going to start charging? And so scenario design was, we basically wrote short stories about what it would be like for somebody to go through that experience as like an ideation exercise to help us understand the flow. Because if it didn't make sense in a story context, it wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense in the real world. Yeah. So Joey became like the lead character in all of these stories that we wrote about wireless charging, about cameras that can see in 3D. Back then it was called perceptual computing. Like wireless display technology, like all these things that now are a lot more commonplace, but back then weren't. And I will never forget my true ex, who I'd stayed friends with, posted on whatever social network was popular at the time, that he had broken up with his boyfriend. And I walked into the office the next day. I was like, hey, everybody, bad news. Joey and Robert broke up last night because Robert was the fictional boyfriend in the persona. Right. People on the team started crying. They had become so emotionally attached to this character of Joey. Right. And for me, I could always separate. It was just the picture of the guy that I knew. But for everybody else, it was like this whole story. And so people literally started writing user scenarios about how Joey recovered from the breakup. And so he was like going to use like wireless charging to find someone new to date. And like, how does that change the scenario? Like they just, and that's the goal. That is the goal, is that you become passionate about solving real people's real problems. Because these personas unlock your empathy and your desire to help and so that's my favorite story. The day everybody cried because Joey broke up with his boyfriend.
That's amazing. Personas are personas used in every product development project?
No, they're not as popular as they were maybe 10 years ago. Okay. Everything's cyclical. I'm sure they'll come back at some point.
Yeah.
All of these things, I don't view them as like I don't think there's a right way to do design and a wrong way to do design. Right. I think the more tools you have in your toolkit and the ability to know when to use them, that's what makes a great designer. Sometimes you need a persona, sometimes you don't. And sometimes you should be doing object-oriented user experience, which is like very in vogue in fashion right now. And sometimes you should be doing scenario-based design. Being able to do both and knowing that the project that you're working on at that moment in time, what it calls for, that's the real skill set.
I see. Now, another post that you put up there once, I know you talk about do it once and do it really well. And you emphasize the principle of not repeating yourself in design to improve user experience.
Yeah.
And so could you give an example of a project that was successful using this approach?
Absolutely. There's one in particular that comes to mind. So this was at my last company. There's a common thing that happens when one page of your experience becomes the dominant page for traffic. So maybe it's the homepage, www.jeff.com. Maybe that page becomes over 50% of the traffic. At Redfin, it was the listing page, the page where you learn everything you want to know about a house. It was different for each house, but there was a template. And that's where all the traffic made sense. At NerdWallet, it was the roundups, which was a way we talked about like the 10 best credit cards or the 10 best banking institutions. And because it gets the most traffic, everyone wants to do something on that page. Because if they're going to work, if they've got a goal to hit, well, they're going to put it on in the place where the most people are going to see it. And so you put it on the page with the most traffic. And after a while, pages like that can get very cumbersome and they can get a lot going on. And they kind of, you have to have a really strong vision of what the page is really supposed to be accomplishing. And one of the projects at Redfin, and again, I'll say the team did all the work. I helped them, I unblocked them, but the team did all the work, was to bring that strong vision to that page, really help out the users, really solve those problems. And I remember when we were doing the audit of the existing version of the page at the beginning of the project, there was a specific call to action, which was like to go tour a house. We counted, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I'm not going to be far off. I think there were 11 different places on the page, all different. Sometimes it was a button, sometimes it was a text link. The wording was always different, but there was like 11 different places that all went to the exact same next step to schedule a tour.
Right.
And there was some pushback about reducing that. There was this mentality of like, well, we need to have it that many times because what if they've scrolled, or what if they're doing this and we want to hit them in the moment? And well, it's obviously there because it tested well at some point in time. But I give the team a lot of props. They really advocated for what they thought was right. And they went out there and tested. And I think they ultimately reduced it from like 11 different places to like 2, maybe 3.
Right.
And I'm not going to talk about numbers because it's a company that I don't work at anymore. But the numbers were real strong.
Yeah.
The new design went forward. And there were a bunch of other things going on at the same time where the page had gotten better. But the number of people clicking on those calls to action, it was a very strong signal. And it was a really successful project. And the reason for that, if we want to get into like the way the brain works and everything, is if you give somebody a really clear thing to do, they are very likely to be successful doing it. As soon as you introduce choice, you have now reduced the odds of them doing the thing that you want them to do. As soon as you enter a third choice, a fourth choice, a fifth choice. And when you're working on something as complex as a website or an app or any kind of software experience, every page is going to have dozens of choices. Whether it's things that you can click on in the navigation, buttons that you can click on, text links that you can click on, you can choose to scroll or not scroll. It's all these choices can overwhelm a user's brain. And it all happens subconsciously. The page loads and their eye takes it all in and their brain tries to decipher the madness. So the more that we can do as designers to really clearly say, hey, it's not actually that hard. Here's the simple thing to do. And I'm not going to distract you with 10 other things. You're going to see the most success. And that's why I always say the do it once, do it well, because imagine there were 4 different calls to action and each of them had 12 different versions on a page. Right. It's insanity. But when you go visit a website, it actually happens all the time. Yeah. So always come with that mentality of less is more. Let the eye breathe. People talk about white space is another word for it. In the video, I'm not going to go into it, but there's VIM, which is an acronym that stands for like all the things that a user has to do. But it all comes down to let the user breathe, make the next step really easy, really clear, and don't confuse the issue.
Beautiful. That's great advice. That's great advice. Through the years, we all have different methods of doing the creative process and integrating the creative process into our life, our work, our career, and advising other people to do the creative process specific ways so that they will, get the best possible results. I'd like to know if you have a specific creative process, how it's evolved over the years, and how it affects what you do.
When I was younger, I was really rigid. I thought there was one right way. Right. I thought this is how you succeed. I was wrong. If I had told myself I was wrong back then, I would have argued with myself. So I don't know how well that advice goes over for people like me, but it goes to a little bit of what I was saying earlier. It's not about learning the right way to do something. It's about learning all the different ways you could do something and knowing when to apply different aspects of that. So we talked about that with user personas, but let's talk about user research. This has been a very design-oriented conversation, but I've led user research teams. Oh, yeah. Back in the day, everyone just did focus groups. It was the one way to do a study. And nowadays, I'll tell you, I can't stand focus groups. It's like the worst way to do a study. But nowadays, people have learned that there's different options. There are usability studies. There's A/B testing as a kind of user research. Let's not forget that. There's in-depth interviews. There's ethnographies. there's all these different ways. There's diaries that you can collect information about people for a research project. And the best user researchers can look at the problem statement in front of them. They can say, this is the business need I'm trying to address, and say, this is the kind of study that will best answer that question. And designers should be able to do the same thing, which is, hey, I know how to do all these different design methods. I know all these different practices and theories and approaches, but I'm looking at this specific project, and here's the things I'm going to pull out of my tool belt. On this one, you know what? I'm going to do a competitive review, because there's a bunch of other companies that have already done this and are succeeding at it. It's new for us, but it wasn't new for them. What can I learn from them? And what patterns can I kind of copy? Because design is all about copy and paste. Or, you know what, in this one, I actually can see that this is when you get really senior. I can see the design in my head. I don't need to do anything. Just give me like 10 minutes and Figma, and I'll show you exactly what this thing is supposed to look like. Being able to tell the difference and being able to employ different methodologies, that is the key to really unlocking and succeeding. Not to believe that there's one way, but to know that there's so many ways, and be really curious about all of them, and be really good about knowing when to use which one.
We've made it all the way to the very last question. Thank you so much for your time and your being here.
This has been a pleasure. I hope I didn't like monologue too much.
No,
it's the theater background. I can just keep going if you don't stop.
No, not at all. Not at all. I do have one final question, and feel free to monologue. I have no problem. So with all of your experience, this has to do with advice for, for new designers or for people that are going into the industry. I would like to know if there was one piece of advice that you would have liked to have been given in your early days. What would that be?
Oh, there's a book in there somewhere.
Right.
I touched upon this a little bit in my last answer, but I'm going to go more into it. Be more curious.
Okay.
That's it. Be more curious. And that can help you in really almost every possible situation that you are going to encounter in your career. Be more curious about different tools and different techniques and different strategies. Like, learn those things. And that's what we kind of just talked about. It's like, have your tool belt of things, but be more curious about people you disagree with. In your career, you're a product designer or you're a designer. Welcome to the world of dealing with marketing managers and product managers. And you are going to disagree with them constantly. If you're a product, you're also going to deal with engineering managers. You're going to disagree with them constantly. And you can either be the person who tries to win, or you can be the person who's really curious about why you disagree with them. Do you have different goals that you're working towards? Do you have different theories of what could work? Be curious about them and what they're trying to do. You're going to have managers. Be curious about your manager. A practice I started that was a real unlocking moment for me in my career was, at the end of every one-on-one with my manager, I would say, is there anything I can help you with? Because it was always like me. It was my manager is in my way, or my manager needs to help me. But when I started looking at my manager and saying, hey, how are you? Is there something I can help you out with? I learned so much, and it opened up so many new dialogues and projects and interesting things. And then one day you're going to have people reporting to you, and it's a whole new ball game at that point. And you're going to have people who react differently than you think they will. And in those moments, they're not wrong. They just have a different way of approaching the world. And be curious, find out about the way they approach the world, learn more about them, and tailor the way you approach them to that. So, like I said, every possible way, be curious.
Beautiful. That's a fantastic note to end the show on. Thank you so much once again for being a part of the show.
David, this was such a pleasure. It was so good to see you. You look the same.
Right.
My eyes are shot, but you look the same.
I appreciate that.